Hello, and thank you for listening. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I have a small request. If you're enjoying the Book and Lounge podcast, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us to continue to bring you engaging discussions on your favorite books. Now let's dive into today's episode, where I'm joined by Katrina and Taiwo to discuss James by Percival Everett. So James is not a retelling, but a reimagining of the story of Huckleberry Finn and Jim, and it's told from Jim's perspective.
What's a reimagining?
Okay, what is it? Please.
It's a conversation between authors.
Sorry?
It's a conversation between authors.
Yeah, but only one author's talking though, isn't it?
So?
The other one's just dead and silent.
But this is why he wrote it. You have to bear in mind his intention, the motivation behind why he wrote the book.
Maybe Percival Everett has those sort of dreams that we encounter in James, so he's able to have his discussion.
Okay, no, that would make sense. Anyway, we're jumping way ahead. Okay, Taiwo, what is the book about?
It's a story of James, isn't it? Or Jim, as he was known in Huckleberry Finn. So it's his perspective on his life, I guess, and how Huckleberry Finn fits into it. And maybe, actually, I don't think Tom Sawyer plays a part at all, does he?
He's mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah, because Huck goes to play with him and then gets into all sorts of adventures. But that's very briefly mentioned.
Mm-hmm. But it's a great perspective.
So basically, as you said, it's telling James's story. So James is a slave living with Miss Watson, who looks after Huckleberry Finn. I couldn't work out, what was the relationship between Huck and Miss Watson?
I thought she wanted to adopt him because they thought his dad was dead. Apart from the fact that the dad was a drunkard and a ne'er-do-well, he used to beat Huck to within an inch of his life. But then because I think there's reference to it in Huckleberry Finn, the previous adventure, which is the adventure of Tom Sawyer, which I don't think, well, I can't remember the story. I think I may have read it many years ago, but they came into riches and the judge held the money in trust, or at least Huck's portion in trust for him, and used to release it bit by bit.
To Miss Watson?
No, to Huck.
Okay.
But Huck wasn't really money-minded. He was more like Tom, who wanted to have an adventure. That's all he's interested in, adventure. But the money seemed to draw Huck's father back into town because he had heard that Huck was getting stooly. And at the same time, he was the recipient of funds. And his father wanted to booze the money away. So his father came back.
Okay. So this story then is but this story itself is told from the perspective of Jim, who changes his name to James. James is living with Miss Watson, and then one day overhears that he's going to be sold, and he runs away. And at the same time, Huckleberry Finn's father has come back into town, and fearful that he's going to get another beating, he also runs away, and they end up on an island together. And then from that island, they have an adventure on the Mississippi. And so this story is really about their journey of James trying to escape, but at the same time, still thinking about his family that he's left behind and how he can get his family out of slavery as well. And then the characters that they encounter along the way. So you both read Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn before you read this book. And I think, Katrina, James is not what you expected. I wonder if you could explain why it's not what you expected and how different is it, and why, I guess, it didn't live up to your expectations.
Well, I suppose I didn't find out enough about James before I read it. So I was expecting a retelling, but through James's voice, more close to the Huckleberry Finn story. And I tried to analyze why I didn't get on with it so well, apart from the fact that it moves quite away, in my opinion, from Huckleberry Finn. I had another look at it and I was slightly reconciled, but I think the child, who's supposed to be about 12 in the first book by Mark Twain, who tells the story. I mean, okay, obviously the person who's telling the story exaggerates in his own favor, or might do. But I felt that Huckleberry Finn, he's sort of, I've got to quite like him in his version of it. And then he becomes just this silly little boy who doesn't know anything. Obviously, it's meant to be about James, but I felt there could be a much better debate between the two of them, because Huckleberry Finn seemed to have a lot more of his own ideas, I felt, in the book. So anyway, there's all sorts of various things that I didn't like about it too much. But nonetheless, it's worth reading.
Okay, what else did you not like about the book?
Well, the relationship that makes the difference in James, I feel like it would have been better to explore how they grew to like each other and how they got trust for each other without that. So that, because it already biases James, doesn't it? Although Huckleberry Finn doesn't know, James is already, his attitudes towards Huckleberry Finn are already affected by that relationship. And I think you don't really need that. I think it would have been more interesting to see it develop without that.
Okay. And Tayo, you really liked the book, and I wonder if you could just tell us why you really liked it.
Well, apart from the fact that it's obviously giving James much more agency, and we understand his worldview and his internal thought process, because the story is about his life and his journey, and his running as part of his journey simply intersects with Huckleberry Finn. Is by chance they come across each other because they're hiding out, they end up hiding out in the same place, Huckleberry Finn having faked his death. But because James has agency, we get to understand that he realizes the potential consequences that him having run is one thing, but Huck having gone, not really missing, but having been presumed dead at the time that he ran, there are implications for him, as in the white folk are going to think that he's killed Huck. So that's another reason why he has to make sure that this running, is do or die kind of, because if you get caught, it's game over. Plus the fact that obviously he's running for a reason, because he doesn't want to be sold to the South, because he knows that the separation will be for life. He'll never come back. And his wife and his daughter will be at the mercy of, well, I guess they're already at the mercy anyway, but the plan is when he runs, his plan is to buy them. He doesn't know how he's going to do it, but that's what the plan is. So anyway, going back to James, I like the fact that we get his interior life because it's from his point of view. We get the fact that he cares for Huck, and the reason, or part of the reason, comes out later on. But I like the fact that colour is explored in James. The whole issue of what is a black person, what is a white person, what does colour really represent, as it does even now, when you say, oh, this is a black person, this is a white person, this is a brown person, the colour of the person's skin, as in how we perceive their colour and what that means in society, financially and economically and socially. And I like the fact that he recognises the fact that Huck he's a youngster. So he cuts him a lot of slack because he doesn't know that much, because he's very young. but James is educated and he's an older man. He's a father of a daughter. He's a husband. And like I said, yeah, he's an older man, but he's educated.
Mhm. So I originally did not really want to read this book because, yeah, I think I'm done with reading books about slavery. So I was very despondent when you guys voted for this as the book of the month. But when I opened it and started reading it, and then got to page 2, page 3, I really started liking it. Mm. And for me, it wasn't necessarily the story that drew me into the book. It was the writing. It was the cleverness of the writing and how he's presented these questions in such a clever way. That is for me what drew me in, and that for me what made the book enjoyable. That and the fact that he's actually challenging. mm, is challenging stereotypes about storytelling, who writes stories, how people are presented in stories. And it just gives you, it makes you think. And that's why I like what I liked about this book. It is the fact that it makes you think and it challenges any preconceptions that we have about things and life and how things are presented to us. So I actually really enjoyed it. I did not read Huckleberry Finn before I read this, and I think maybe that was a good thing, considering Katrina's experience. But then again, I'm not sure. I would have expected it to be the same because this is being told from James's perspective. So I don't know that I would have expected it to be maybe the same or to have as much of Huck himself within the book. But as a book, I mean, I actually really enjoyed it. But then again, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because he's Percival Everett. He is a good writer. So just gonna touch on some of the things, issues, and themes explored in the book. The first thing that I want to start off with is I think this is what I thought was most striking and what I thought was most clever is that this idea that the enslaved people spoke to white people in a certain way, but spoke completely different amongst themselves. So when they were speaking to their masters, in inverted commas, they presented themselves as dumb and stupid because that's what was expected of them. But actually, when they were amongst each other, they spoke normally, proper English and challenged and had discussions that challenged ideas and all of that. And so I just wanted, I mean, that got me thinking about today. I wanted to explore where do we still see people code switching? And I guess not in just language, but also in behavior and personality, because I'm sure it happens.
It depends on the environment that you're in, doesn't it? I mean, because most people will automatically code switch if they're in a work environment and put on their work voice compared to if they're at a party with their friends or if they're at home with their relatives. So most people will code switch because human beings are multifaceted. So, you're more than one thing, you're many things. And it depends on the condition and environment within which you find yourself as to how you present yourself, which includes your language.
But I think also sometimes I don't know if expected is the right word, but sometimes you have to do it to be able to get somewhere, to be able to succeed in certain situations. And I'm thinking, as a Black woman, for example, sometimes I may like to wear my hair in a huge afro, but actually, if I did that and went to work, that might go against me. I have to tone down how I speak, not let my absolutely aggressive, sparkling personality come out.
Aggressive or assertive?
Assertive. Sorry, I meant assertive. Thank you for correcting me. If I let that come out, it may not be seen or perceived the right way and accepted So I have to kind of tone down. So I'm forced in that instance to code switch. But then when I'm speaking to friends, my way of speaking, and probably not even intentionally, is completely different.
But also because the fact that when you're talking with friends, communication, for it to be effective, needs to be understood by both parties, doesn't it? So if you're saying about pidgin words or slang or colloquialisms, your friends who flow with you will probably understand these terms. But if you were using them in the office environment, not everyone would get what you're saying, which means that your communication is no longer effective if you are trying to communicate information. So it wouldn't be appropriate. It's a bit like, if your captain tells, sorry, you want to say something, Katrina?
No, you carry on and then I'll come in.
Okay, I just want to say, if your job entails going to court, it may entail that when you go to court, you conduct yourself in a certain way. You probably will not wear the clothes that you will necessarily wear to work. You might suit up, you're suited and booted, because you're going to a particular environment and you're expected to conduct yourself, your speech, your mannerisms, etc., according to the environment within which you find yourself. Not just about career progression, it's also about making sure that you are understood. The whole thing about professionalism.
Yeah.
So that applies, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's much more riding on it in a work environment than in a social setting. Although in a social setting for work, there is that crossover. And especially when alcohol comes into play, all manner of things can be released, So yeah, it can get very muddy. The waters can get very muddy.
Uh-huh. Katrina.
I suppose mostly what I was going to say is the same as what Taiwo is saying, but it seems from the amount that Black people talk about code switching, that there's more pressure, or some people perceive it that there's more pressure on them to code switch, because to me, it's something that you do, like Taiwo is saying, if you're talking to an older person or you're talking to a young person, you're at home, you're at work, you're, in all the multiple different situations you find yourself, you adjust a little bit or a lot. And whether it's with your clothing or how you're speaking, the slang you use, like I wouldn't swear in front of my children, but I might swear if I was with my friends, My children would, I've been telling them all these years I don't swear, so they mustn't catch me out, So, there's all these... No, I don't swear with you guys either. I think, we do all these things automatically, but I suppose that if you coming into Britain and you've come from overseas, there's greater shifts probably. And the people who've mastered that and they can, succeed in the British environment, they're probably conscious that they make a very big, or some people will be conscious they've had to adjust a lot for that. I don't know. But you see it with, young people who, they're not very good in the work environment because they've either not accepted that they need to make those adjustments, or they're rebelling against it, that, that we shouldn't have to do this. I don't know whether we should or we shouldn't, but if you do, it usually works better for you.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, so James is presented as literate, deeply thoughtful, and intellectually curious. He's learned to read by sneaking into the judge, who's one of the characters' library, and basically reading his books and then learning about all these philosophers and the ideas that they explored and presented, right? So he has to hide that. He has to hide the fact that he can read and that he actually knows how to speak properly, not how slaves expected to speak. So Well, why do you think societies, even today, feel threatened by people being fully intelligent, or at least some people being fully intelligent and fully human?
Well, it's harder to exploit people, isn't it, if you see them as the same as yourself? I think that must be part of it, because when you see a war-torn environment, shall we say, wherever it may be, and especially when you see people living and struggling in very difficult environments, I think people fail to realize that that is not, that they lived in probably many of them will have lived in a house like the one I'm in, until it got smashed up. Because people find it easier to empathize with the Ukrainians, don't they, than they do with people of colour who are in unfortunate circumstances. Oh, I think it's something to do with not seeing people the same as yourself, that you can ignore them or exploit them or misuse them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think because if you other, yeah. So I think the question is, why do you think societies feel threatened by certain people being seen as fully human and intelligent?
What I've written down is social hierarchies. People feel threatened by considering the full humanity of the other because it means that their position in the social strata will be threatened. And all societies all over the world, who is it that said this? I think it was that guy from Outcast.
Okay.
Andre 2000. Yeah, he was the one that said, why is it?
Philosopher, that one.
Yeah. He said, why is it that Black people in all societies all over the world are always at the bottom of the pile in terms of social status? And so the darker the color of your skin, the less status you tend to have as a rule of thumb. Also, I think it helps you to deaden your conscience or to avoid your conscience niggling you too much if you consider the other as less than yourself. Then you can get away with a lot of shit that you know is wrong, but you can do it anyway because, you just deaden your conscience. You convince yourself that this person is not a person, not a full person at least. Therefore, I can X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I agree with both of you. It's basically because you don't want them to be a threat to you. So if you consider them subhuman or not as intelligent, then you can do whatever it is that you want to do and to justify your mistreating them. Following on from that, slavery and violence, they tend to be upheld by existing belief systems and ideas and social norms. So, for example, slavery, they used color and a religion to justify slavery and the mistreatment of Black people, and also to justify why they could enslave them and take them to work in the plantations. They're not that clever. Science has proven that, or they're inferior because they've got smaller brains, that kind of thing. So, and I do still think that things like that probably still do exist today. And can you think of any, I guess, any social norms or beliefs that were used to justify inequality that exists in the world today?
When you consider the average pay packet between a man and a woman, what's the difference in, if the whole thing isn't the bean collectors, the dinner ladies, you're comparing the two work outputs when they are comparable, and yet the salary, the remuneration is not comparable. And it's because in society, the woman has a lower position and is traditionally considered to have been looked after by a man, husband, father, protector, and therefore she didn't need as much money. So I guess it was a way in which, in some ways, capitalism could just screw the workers. But I guess it was more than that, wasn't it? is about the
I
whole
think it's also
gender inequality.
sorry.
Go on.
Yeah. Sorry. I was going to say, I think if you're looking back at it historically a little bit, I think it's because of the change from seeing the family as a unit as well. Because, if you go back to the sort of the older days when people started work, boys started work, probably girls as well, but they started work when they were very young. But they didn't get the full wage, which in some ways that's okay. Maybe they couldn't do quite as much because they were young. But it was also to do with the fact that they were unmarried, so they weren't supporting other people. And so I suppose it's that seeing the whole thing, and the child would be contributing to his family or her family. Whereas now we're much more individual, aren't we? So everybody needs to be able to support themselves more, I suppose, perhaps. But that wasn't really your question, was it, Jackie? I'm trying to remember what your question was.
Yeah, so I was just wondering what narratives do we use today to justify inequality? I mean, the only thing I could think of is, for example, if we're thinking about the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks of today, I mean, there's actually a website where you can go in and enter your salary, and it tells you how many times more Elon Musk earns compared to you, right?
You want just to depress yourself,
Well, if you want to depress yourself, yes.
or just to make you more angry.
I think, maybe to incite anger is a better motive, yeah. But yeah, so I'm just really looking at, first of all, there's that inequality, and then there's also the inequality between countries.
Well, the inequalities you're just saying about these people who are paid incredibly, to me, ridiculous salaries. I suppose there's the capitalist type of argument about motivating people. And if you take away the inequalities, so there's a justification for people who've apparently been so clever to have built up these wonderful industries getting paid. I suspect a lot of luck went into it, but there we are.
Inheritance as well.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can think of other. Between countries. It's because it's so difficult to challenge these historical developments, isn't it? I suppose you could talk about reparations and things to try to equalize it out, but it's very difficult, even if everyone agreed that was what ought to be done, to recognize how to do it in a way that would actually create more equalities, I think. Perhaps we'll all be completely short of fuel very soon, and we can be equalized that way.
They can afford fuel if fuel prices continue rising as they are, whereas the majority of us probably wouldn't be able to. But coming back to one thing you said about capitalism, I think that's one of the big forces that drive inequality, and especially in the US. So the idea of, in the US, if you talk to anybody about socialism and this idea that actually you give people who are people who are more disadvantaged an opportunity and you give them handouts, they completely freak out at the thought. The idea that you do that you support the people in the lower ranks of society is alien to them. And then there's this other idea of, somebody has to be number one and it has to be America. So we have to do everything. If Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Sam Altman are destroying the world, it does not matter. As long as America is the one that's destroying the world, we have to be number one.
USA.
Exactly. It probably applies here as well. I mean, do we not still talk about empire and, being the best? And anyway, yes. So there's that. I think that idea of community and society being more individual now, I think that's also one of the things that's led to the rise of inequalities. Because I think if you live in a society which is much more communal, where people look after each other and people look after each other's welfare, you're less likely to find that huge huge discrepancy amongst people.
But do you think Ubuntu is too close to maybe socialism or a form of socialism?
Socialism is not a bad thing, is it?
There are many forms of socialism. There are many forms of democracy.
True. But inherently, is socialism a bad thing? I don't think it is. It's about bringing people to a certain level of life and equality. That was the whole idea behind socialism before Stalin and his, well, actually even started before Stalin, before they changed it to communism. But that was the whole idea, wasn't it? Equality among...
Ensuring, wasn't it? Ensuring that everyone had sufficient to meet their needs, at least at a subsistence level. But it's also about people trying not to be too greedy. Because when you have more than enough and you know that you have more than your needs, most people will struggle to give away what is surplus to their requirements, even though they know that it is of really no use to them. But it could be...
But do they know that though, Taiwo? Do they know that?
Well,
or do they think that? Because I don't think they do. Otherwise, why would they keep it?
Because it's theirs. Because they worked hard and earned it. They believe in the
meritocracy. But is it also about status as well? Because there's a lot of making an equivalence between how rich you are and your status in life, your status in society, of how you're respected and everything. So, and there's nothing wrong with the concept of socialism, but there do tend to be some people who are cleverer than others in this world. And some of those clever ones work out ways to, manipulate and do a little bit better than everybody else. So you've definitely got to have checks and balances on it, I think. It's got its own problems, hasn't it, when you look at societies that have tried to put it into being.
There's no perfect form, is there? There's no perfect approach because human beings, whatever kind of government system or economic philosophy they apply, are imperfect beings. So there's always going to be, pros and cons to it. But the whole thing about status, where I guess status is very important to people that are always looking out, and therefore their status, they feel that they need to raise their status if they can, but if they can't, if they can push down the status of others, therefore theirs is consequently raised. Whereas those that are looking in, it's not really a big issue for them as to whether they're considered by other people of a high or a low status, because they have that kind of, to a large extent, an inner contentment.
I think that inner contentment exists more in societies where the discrepancy between the haves and have-nots, or the difference, is not that great. Have they not done surveys and they found that actually people who live in poorer countries generally actually happier than people who live in the West? So, yeah, status in itself is not.
Bhutan and the happiness index, rather than...
Yeah, they measure happiness index rather than GDP, don't they? Yeah, just to come back to the book. So James is constantly performing a diminished version of himself to survive. Do you think that identity today is something we control? Or are we shaped by what's safest and most acceptable in a given space?
So it's also about consequences, though, isn't it? If you know you're about to catch another flight, or you've only got an hour between flights, then you mind it's prudent, unless you don't mind missing that flight, even though you know that in this particular space and time, this person wearing their uniform has authority because we've given them authority to do a particular job. They can bend the rules and make my life difficult such that I miss my flight. Doesn't mean that I like them, doesn't mean that I respect them. I may just think...
Doesn't mean that they're right.
No, it doesn't mean that they're right. But also it doesn't mean that I know all the facts. It may be that there's something that they're looking into, but their administration is very slow. And therefore I'm sat in a room stewing, not knowing anything for a 2-hour period because the dots haven't yet joined up for them to say, okay, fine, you're free to go. But I'm not privy to a lot of information behind the scenes that is going on. Slowly, I agree, but I don't know. But the consequence to me may be negligible. I haven't got another flight. I'm only going home. I'm happy to waste my time in the airport for 2 hours or even 5 hours. I'm holding on my British passport. What are you going to do? You're going to put me in prison? Okay, so put me in prison. But I'm still holding my British passport. And I know that there will be solicitors that are happy to challenge you, and all the rest. Whereas if I'm holding a different nationality passport, or I don't speak very good English, or then the consequence to me may be very different. And the consequence to Jim or James as an enslaved person, it can be life and death. So you have to weigh it all out.
Yeah, and that's one thing that the novel suggests, I guess, is that survival often requires compromise, or you keep silent in certain situations. You just play along. For example, in that instance where he looked at that woman, the old woman, and then the old woman started question, "Did your slave look at me?"
And also the fact that it's about perception. You are perceived as a white person, therefore you have a certain position in this particular society. I'm perceived as a black person. Therefore, it's a case of, when James was at the sawmill, it's learning, the rules are like in a retention center, according to the old book, the last book that we read. The rules are very flexible. The rules are what I say the rules are today. Tomorrow, I may say that the rules are different. So when the slave owner says, "Come for your lashes," and he says, "Lashes?" ? He said, "Oh, we've got a back chatter here." And when I read that, I just held up my hands. I'm just like, what the? All he said was lashes, because he didn't understand. What have I done that you're going to lash me? But it's not about you have done anything. It's about I'm seasoning you, or I choose to lash you because I can. I've had a bad day, or for whatever reason. It doesn't matter the reason. You're going to get lashes because I say you're going to get lashes. And he lashes him to the point that he blacks out.
Yeah, a lot of violence. And that's
That was so painful to read.
Yeah, so there was that, and then there was poor Sammy and what happens to her. And also, I can't remember the name of the lady now, when James goes back, and the overseer who he kills. Those for me were the three things that were the hardest to read. Just the randomness of the violence and how it can change somebody's life instantly, and also the powerlessness
But that sort of violence isn't. It's very unpleasant to read it. But in the context, I don't think it's that. It's not purposeless, because by the randomness of it, you intimidate people and you keep people on edge and subservient, because you never know how the ground's going to shift next, and the punishment you can get, it can be so severe. So it has its use in that system, if you see what I mean. Just like in the retention center, didn't do lashes and things, but the constant shifting of things made the women very unsettled all the time. I think it's part of how you control, because you said it before, Jackie, that you wonder why plantations weren't set fire to more often and opportunities taken to get away. It's psychologically keeping because there are a lot more slaves in certain places anyway. There were a lot more slaves than there were overseers, weren't there? So all of this is part of how do you control a lot of people who you're behaving very, very badly towards. But of course, the individual sadism of certain people, then they're just given their opportunity, aren't they, to bring that out.
But at the same time, you can only use this tool of fear, which is what it is. It's a kind of structural fear, because James talks about it, the fact that he's always on tenterhooks. He doesn't know when or where danger will arrive at his door.
Yeah.
But it can only take you so far. I mean, the overseer that raped that woman, I can't remember her name, and she's saying, "Not again, not again," which means it's not the first time and it won't be the last. At the same time, you can see that he made sure that her husband wasn't around. So he's not going to go there and say, "Okay, you out, I want to rape your wife," because that may be something too much that he's like, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to kill this guy, then I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to kill this guy, kill my wife, then kill myself. So there's a breaking point that people have, and you don't really know where that breaking point is when the structure that you've put in place of this constant fear, you don't know when it's going to break a person that they just think, I've got nothing to lose. And then they just set fire to everything, or they just run amok.
I think I understand what you're saying, and especially in relation to James's inaction in that situation, because he was absolutely helpless, but then he had his family to think about. And so had he done anything at that time, he wouldn't have been able to save himself or his family. So, but coming back to the randomness of the violence, I mean, a pencil, you get caned and killed over a pencil.
Not caned, flogged.
Yeah, sorry, flogged and murdered over a pencil. You get just for answering back.
But it's a message, isn't it? To maintain that fear and keep that atmosphere of fear, you have to continue to reinforce it and send the message. You don't strap someone down or lash them down to the tree or pin them to the ground and start flogging them within an inch of their life or until they're dead, just by the side. You do it in public. So you call all the slaves to watch because you want to instill that psychological destabilization. You want them to be always on edge. You want them to always be kind of off kilter emotionally. You want them to fear you. So you're sending a message. You're always sending a message. And there's a whole structure around it, not just the overseers. We've got the overseers, but we've got guns as well. You haven't got guns. And James didn't know how to use a gun. It was one of the other enslaved men that said, yeah, I've seen how you use a gun. You have to cock it. You have to this, you have to that. And at the same time, when you find with slave rebellions that this plantation, there's a revolution going on, a revolt, they have garrisons of soldiers or whatever, militia, that will be called from the next town to come and put down this rebellion. So it's a whole structure.
And so trying to relate that to today, are there any situations where you think that that same level of fear is instilled upon us? We just seem to accept things. The government may say, like lockdown, for example, everybody has to be in their house. We're in lockdown. Or you're not allowed to go to certain demonstrations or hold placards that say something during a demonstration.
But I guess I'd go back to that issue of consequences. If the government is saying you're locking down, and if you don't stay indoors, if you come out on the street, this is a consequence. It's about whether you're prepared to pay the price. If you hold up the sign, I support Palestine action, and therefore the government says, we're going to detain you, or possibly charge you and put you in prison because you held up a placard. But I guess if enough people did it, then it would just clog up the whole system because it's a structure, isn't it? And therefore the system would grind to a halt.
Yeah, there is something about consent as well, though, isn't it? Because with the COVID restrictions, I suppose the message of the rationale behind it convinced enough people, whether it was right or wrong. But at the time, people were enough convinced that it was a necessary thing. They needed to do it to protect everybody else. And I mean, I wasn't even in the country when it started, but this is the impression I receive.
Behind.
Well, they're following the science, yes. But I mean, the idea that something's contagious, so you want to put some barriers in place, sounds a lot more reasonable than the idea of, to me anyway, than the idea of holding up a placard is going to cause anybody any, it's a bit of writing on a paper, isn't it? But at the same time, a lot of people might think that's ridiculous. But how many of them are motivated to go and hold that same piece of paper so that the whole system is overwhelmed? Is it important enough to enough people, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, and that reminds me of are they neutral? Of the characters in the book who say that they're not pro-slavery, They don't own slaves. They don't believe in the idea of owning people and in slavery. But they don't really take any active action to intervene when people are being flogged. They themselves, although they don't own slaves, they also have the same beliefs that actually Black people are not as intelligent.
White supremacy.
Because even people who were against slavery could still be white supremacists, if you see what I mean. You know, they would still be thinking that white people are in some way or another better. But if you were an abolitionist and you believed in it, at whatever level you believed in it, I presume you were, I don't know if I'm right in this, you may know better than me, but presumably if you helped somebody escape, you were committing a crime. As a white person, you know, you wouldn't get much punishment, I don't know, but because that person is a bit of property. So you're enabling somebody to lose their property. And I mean, this is what in the Huckleberry Finn, the original book, Huckleberry is struggling with these ideas because he sees the law as something that this is a piece of property. And what did Miss Watson do to me that I should deprive her of the money that her slave is worth? And he's weighing that against the fact that he actually really likes Jim, and he's come to realize that Jim has all the emotions that everybody else has about caring, missing his family and all that. So he's weighing those two things, which is partly why I think it's a shame in the James book that isn't explored from James's point of view. But anyway, that's a different issue.
But how would he explore that from James's point of view, though?
Well, I would have thought James in both books, you know, every time Huckleberry Finn goes off on his own, I'd be terrified. I would have thought James should be terrified that he's going to tell people that he is going to, you know, that he will betray James. But that never came through to me that James was thinking about those things.
I think he did. He did.
He had a lot of... Yes, but with Huck, he seemed to have a lot of... what's he called? Huckleberry Huck. He seemed to have a lot of confidence in him throughout that he wouldn't... Whereas I would have sort of thought he'd always have that sneaking worry.
I don't know. I thought he did.
I thought he did because the whole thing about code switching, it was a long time, wasn't it, before he actually revealed his true voice to Huck. And then Huck was upset, saying, you've never trusted me. All these years, you never trusted me. And he kind of like, you know,
yes, yeah.
I didn't trust you. I couldn't trust you.
I suppose. But going back to what you were saying, Jackie, about, I just think that if anybody has helped a slave escape, they will presumably be committing some sort of crime, which would just put a bit of a brake for many people on actively. You know, they may think slavery is wrong, but to actively go against it would, you know, be a brake for some.
I think in some ways that's the point, though, isn't it? That itself is the point, the consequence, the price. Because for some white people, some of the states, if they were known to be an abolitionist, they could have been killed. In some of those southern states, if they'd known to have helped an enslaved person escape slavery, they would have been killed by the other white crackers or whatever you want to call them. They would have been killed. The fact that, you know, you're an abolitionist is like, you know, calling some Americans a communist. It's an offensive, an offensive term, and you could lose your lives. So it's not just about, you're just going to be put in prison. But the fact that it was so dangerous wouldn't prevent certain people because of their convictions. It's like, how far are you prepared to go for your principles and convictions?
And that one, I did want to have a follow-up question to that then. We talked about people who go on demonstrations for Palestinian action and all of that. Is staying neutral in the face of injustice a form of participation? All of us who are not on the streets marching against what's being done in Gaza, what's being done against the Palestinian people? Are we actually participating in their oppression? Because we don't want to get sent to prison.
Aren't you making an assumption? Aren't you assuming that we're on the side of the Palestinians rather than on the side of the nation of Israel?
I am assuming.
That's an assumption you shouldn't be making.
That's why I said some of us. Not some.
Yeah, but if
And apart from that, protest
it's so simple. Yes, because the actual marching might not. There are other ways to protest, I would hope, because the marching, it seems to me that there's quite a lot of different motivations amongst people who are doing those marches. And that makes me concerned about getting involved in it.
But you're never going to get a homogeneous, is that it? Yeah. You're never going to get a homogeneous 100%, everyone's there on a march for exactly the same reason. There could be 100 people on a demo, and there are 100 different reasons why they're on a demo. But the fact that they're on the demo and it's been organized for a particular reason, that's good enough. There will be a counter demo. There will be counter people that are going to, and then the police keep the two demonstrations apart because they don't want them to clash. But the fact that you attended, that's enough. The fact that you did something, you left the comfort of your home and you did something. Or maybe you say, okay, I'm not going to attend the demo. I'm going to give some money to Palestine Action or to the Israeli lobby group or whoever you're supporting, You're going to give them a tenner, or I'm going to sign the petition. Every little drop of water makes the mighty ocean, isn't it? You're doing something your own little way, even if this thing doesn't maybe directly impact you, but you want to contribute in some way.
Do you think that as a society, the majority of us make that contribution, or are the majority of us just sitting there because it doesn't affect me? It's not affecting my everyday life and how I live my life. It's nothing to do with me. Am I making a presumption? Because I believe that that's what the majority of us are like. We just prefer to go home and Netflix and chill and bury our heads in the sand because it's not affecting our everyday life and well-being.
Netflix and chill.
I do.
Moving on.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Moving on.
So James insists on changing his name from Jim to James. It feels small, but it's actually a big thing because he's reclaiming his identity. And so in today's context, what do you think are ways that people reclaim identity and resist being defined by others?
It's important that he does because it's something that he has chosen for himself. So it's about autonomy, isn't it? Apart from the fact that James seems much more dignified, it sounds much more mature than Jim.
My grandfather was called Jim. He never seemed it to have... He was quite a formidable person, actually, with the same name. But it's interesting. No, I'm just joking. But it is interesting because really, in this society anyway, in Britain and a lot of the world now, you don't choose. I mean, you might choose how you vary your name, but your name itself is usually given to you, isn't it? It's given to you when you're a child. So you can then play around with it. Not that many people, I suppose, actually change it completely.
I think when I thought about this question, I was thinking about, especially in relation to women and marriage, because I think more and more women are choosing to keep their maiden names rather than take on their husband's names. I've heard of instances where the husband is taking on the woman's name. And also some married women, when they get divorced, they go back to their maiden names to reclaim their identity so that they're not associated with the marriage. But also equally, there are some women who cannot wait to take on their husband's names when they get married. And I don't know what that says about the identity. Sorry?
I said, therefore, to associate with their husband and their marital status.
And the fact that they're married, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think if I was getting married now, I'd be more inclined not to change my name. I don't feel it particularly defines you. I mean, I don't feel like it makes me a different person having a different name, but I actually thought that my husband's name is quite a good name and a nice name. So I was quite happy to take it, you know. I might think of that a bit differently now. But do you think your name
treated you differently as a married person?
No.
Okay.
As a married person, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I think I quite resist a lot of labels and all the rest of it that people want to define themselves by. I just think I'm me, and that's it. And yeah, if I have a different name, I'm still me. So it doesn't change me in any essential way. It might change other people's perceptions. Certainly, my surname, because when I've spoken to people on the phone, and because my voice sounds very English, they then start to hypothesize to themselves that my surname is something Eastern European. And then there's other people who've turned out to be rather disappointed when they discovered that the lady with the Bantu name is not Bantu. So, yeah, I mean, it must affect things a little bit, but it doesn't. Those are things that would weigh on me.
Yeah. I guess the only other time I think when maybe people change their name and it affects how they are perceived is where they have a very foreign sounding name and then they change it to an English name just so that they're much more accepted.
I'm assuming that would apply to elsewhere. So if someone settles in the Czech Republic, maybe they take on a Czech name in order to fit in or assimilate or whatever the word is.
Some people get fed up with having to always explain how to pronounce their name and how to spell it, don't they? My mother had an Italian name, and she was delighted to get rid of it with her married name, because my maiden name was Cooper. So it's a straightforward English, traditional English name, if you like. She was quite pleased to shed off her name, which was Farinoto, because she'd get fed up with explaining to people how to spell it and all that. I mean, Taiwo, you've got a more impressively spelt name, I would have said, your surname. Does it cause any issues?
Yeah, I guess in this environment. But in my hometown, it doesn't. It's a straightforward name in Western Nigeria, but here, yeah, I guess it is. But I guess I'm more interested in the issue of how the husband and wife relate to each other rather than what they call themselves. I think that's much more important to me. So what's in a name? Whatever you want to put in the name is in the name.
My final question then. So by retelling the familiar story from James's perspective, Percival Everett forces us to confront how perspectives shape the truth. What stories today do you think are still being told from one side?
There's a little war going on that I think we hear from one side.
A little war? What are you referring to?
Oh, it's not a war then, is it? Because we don't have Congress approval, so it can't be a war. Whatever's going on in Iran.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the military incursion. Okay.
What military incursion?
Putin's military incursion.
Sorry?
Putin's military incursion, wasn't it? It wasn't a full-scale war. It's a military incursion.
But Trump doesn't call it a war either. He's copied Putin in that. He's got some other form of words to describe it because he isn't supposed to go to war, is he, without Congress approval?
It's funny though, because one of the questions that you asked earlier about fear and I think it was something along the lines of how is fear used in the modern day now to control people or something like that. It made me think, because it's kind of going around in my head, and I was thinking of, there was a time, and I think it's still going on, but maybe not as much. There was a time it was a big thing. A lot of women from the eastern part of Nigeria were moving to Italy, and they were being told that they were going to get work in restaurants. And it wasn't. Obviously, it was getting them into the sex trade. And the way in which they controlled them to keep them in prostitution until they had paid their debt. And it would take years for them to pay off the debt of getting the passport, the flight, the accommodation when they get there, etc., 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 was that before they leave Eastern Nigeria, they'll go through a ritual. And that ritual will, it's in their head that, the juju is strong. That the ritual will come on them or on their parents or their siblings or, if they don't toe the line, basically. And that's how, it's like a psychological process almost of indoctrination, because they had a belief that the ritual that they had gone through, a bit like a seasoning of an enslaved person, isn't it? When you've got the person chained in their mind, then you've got the whole body.
Well, I mean, some people would say religion played or, plays that role or did play that role to some extent anyway.
The opium of the people.
But I think nowadays we're on the bread and circuses, aren't we? That's, the Roman Empire. Because, Jackie, you're saying people don't rise up and protest about things, but they have bread and circuses, don't they? Netflix and Uber Eats and...
What else do we have to worry about? I mean, let those people in Iran die. They're not our relatives. Nothing to do with us.
Yeah, normally it's over there though, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, until it comes to your doorstep, we're not really bothered. But now that petrol is going to go up, food prices are going to go up, flights have gone up, maybe it just might come on other people's radar because it's affecting them.
But what will people do? Be what Trump said, you need to take back the Strait of Hormuz yourselves if you want the oil.
Well, no, but I guess the elections are coming on the 7th of May.
To punish the government.
Yeah.
So what's that going to do?
I don't know how that's going to help Trump and his dilemma at the Strait of Hormuz, because I think public opinion is
against the war.
Yeah, and also the elections are also coming in the US. And the US, the one thing that they're absolutely against is anything that affects the economy and anything that affects oil prices.
Yes, but what I mean is that they're not, however people protest about that, it's not because of the Iranian people.
No, of course not. That's why I said it's only until it comes to your doorstep that it's still used to people start taking notice. They're not protesting because people are dying in Iran. They're protesting because food prices are high or because petrol is costing them a lot more than it used to. It's not nothing to do with people in Iran.
It's a little bit complicated though, isn't it? Because there are people, apparently, so we're told, whether we're told truthfully or not, there are people in Iran who, see this as something that might lead to them getting a regime they like better. I think those people are dwindling.
That not have happened already if that was the case. If you think about it, and this is what Trump was banking on, right? That if they go and take out the Ayatollah, then the people in Iran were going to rise up and then demand a better government for themselves. And this comes back to the question that I just asked. What is it that we're being told only from one side?
Well, I think we're only getting one side of the story. But it does appear that there were a significant number, however many that is, I don't know, but of people who didn't particularly like the regime in Iran. Now, some of those people are apparently were quite happy with the idea initially anyway of being bombed as the only way forward for them. So now I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong, but when you're outside of it, is not on your doorstep really, and you have to make some sort of a judgment about what you support. It's complicated. That's all I'm saying. To me, something like the Palestinian situation is less complicated, although, as Tyra says, not everyone will have the same opinion about it.
I think we'll leave Palestine and Gaza and Iran for now and come back to James. And so what score would you give out of 5 for the book and why? And would you recommend it?
I'm going to give it 4.5. I'm going high because I found it an enjoyable read. And yeah, I found it more fun than reading Huckleberry Finn actually. But then again, I guess it's because it's not really a modern story, but he writes in a modern way. maybe that's why his prose seems to be more accessible. And also, I like the fact that some of the parts of Huckleberry Finn were not, obviously it's Huck's story, were not important to James, because James' story is a different story. So the whole, those two families in the South that were killing up each other was kind of just skipped over. It wasn't a big thing. Whereas with Huckleberry Finn, it was a whole big rigmarole, which kind of bogged down the novel to an extent. I like the fact that Daniel Decatur Emmett is such a complicated character. And I like how he used him as a device to consider the issue of the white liberal and how liberal is a white liberal. I thought that was great. I like the idea of colorism and the person that could pass for black, and also the kind of bluff, or was it a double bluff? You know, the black man wearing blackface in order to pass as a white, but really he's black. It's like wheels within wheels. That was good. I like the whole issue of enslavement and mental health. Brock, he was an interesting character. Was there really a Masakori, or was Brock just off his head? Was he just mad? And they knew he was mad. And as long as they continued to feed him and he continued to have a hole in the corner in order to, do his business, he would just stay there and continue to shovel. He was just mad.
Mm.
And they were just using him. They were basically abusing him. Yeah, there were so many interesting characters. Some parts of it were very hard to read though. But yeah, for 4.5, I'd recommend it.
I don't know for what reason I didn't get on with it so well. And partly I just think because I got into the Huckleberry Finn story, I didn't have any problem with the way the Mark Twain's writing. I found that story carried me along like the river. There's a lot of description of the Mississippi and the things that are going on that. And I suppose I was just too much into that because James, I just found, I don't know, I just didn't gel with me in many ways, although everything that Tyrone says about it is true. And this whole idea of the code switching and these devices to make you think about the slavery, it's all there. Anyway, I would give it a 3 for myself. I wouldn't not recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend reading the two books together. Book's got lots of interesting ideas. Some of the turns of phrase, when I went back and looked at it again, I realised that I hadn't taken enough notice of the prose, mostly because I just wasn't enjoying it. But looking at the writing, it is very nice. It is very good.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, that is what actually drew me into the book. It's just how it starts and the humor as well. I mean, I wasn't expecting to find any element of humor in this book. And so just the writing style and how he narrates the story with a bit of humor, although you really shouldn't have been laughing in some of the circumstances, especially when he was describing what you said earlier on, Taiwo, about the black man whitening up only to blacken up again. And and so it was ridiculous, but also really quite funny. And it just showed the absurdness of defining people by color. So I like how he explored that idea. I like the fact that it presented different views and different ideas about slavery. And one thing that we didn't talk about is the judge. I like how he challenged the idea that the black man is not educated and is not capable of thinking, using the Jim's relationship and the judge and what happens at the end. So I think it's actually a really clever book. I absolutely enjoyed the writing style. I think it's what kept me going despite some of the really harrowing events that happen. I mean, normally, if I was reading a book like this, I would probably if I'd read something really horrifying like they were in this book, I would probably put it down. But I like the fact that he did not dwell so much on the horror. So yeah, I mean, I really liked it. I like the code switching. I like the fact that he brings in the philosophers, but some of it I thought was perhaps unrealistic, because when you're drowning, you're not going to be thinking about a philosopher and what they thought. But having said that, I still like that he brought that in to actually challenge the notion and the ideas that people have about Black people, and especially Black people during slavery. So I would definitely recommend it. As I think I said, I got a copy from the library, but I'm actually going to buy a copy for myself. That's how much I liked it. So out of 5, I would give it a 4. Yeah, so that brings us to an end. Only leaves me to say thank you for sparing the evening, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any of our other episodes, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget to share. Goodbye.